Ladies and gentlemen,
They say the next big thing is here.
the Steve Warneke Show.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Steve Warneke Show. That is me. Hello, thanks for being here. So great to have everybody on our weekly podcasts that are everywhere, but primarily at stevewarneke.com. If you want to head there and get your copy of From Boy to Blue, becoming one of America's finest, award-winning Boy to Blue. We won the SIPA Evie Award here recently. This week's podcast came to me after I wrote this week's article. I set out this week to write an article about statistics. And I was looking specifically for statistics involving officer use of force and officer-related shootings. And it was such a nightmare. It really was. I mean, statistics are impossible. They're impossible. They're anybody can use statistics for any purpose. They're easily manipulated. And I've seen the same statistics used to support both sides of an argument. And I got very frustrated. So I went on to write an article, and I used a few statistics at the beginning to give you an impression of the vastness of police calls. And then I just went on to basically testify uniquely about my 15-year career and what I experienced at a major city police department. You can check that article out at stevewarneke.com. I want to give you some examples right now of what I found this week and why statistics are a nightmare. First thing I set out to do was I wanted to find out how many calls police officers respond to in America across a year. Just a ballpark. Impossible. Could not find it anywhere. I just could not find it. The first thing I found was a 911 association, a national one, that put out a statistic that said there's 240 million calls to 911 nationwide as a ballpark every year. So I could have used that statistic, and I did in my article just to give you an impression of how many people are calling, because that just gives you some perspective. But I could start to use that statistic in ways. But when I started looking at the statistic, it wasn't necessarily correct. It doesn't account for a lot of things. For instance, when there's a major incident, typically there's multiple calls to 911. It doesn't account for that. Doesn't account for 911 hangups, which from mobile devices occur more and more. It doesn't account for police officers that take self-initiated activity like a traffic stop or a pedestrian stop. There's no 911 call resulting in that. So it's really not a fair picture to say how many police calls went on. So I moved on because I didn't want to use that because I wanted an accurate number. And I found some more statistics. This one said, this was from the Department of Justice, 1/4 of Americans have interaction with law enforcement. I'm like, okay, now we're getting somewhere as 1/4 of Americans. And I start to look into this. First thing was, it was in-person contacts and remote contacts. Being over the phone, calling in, well, that's not, you can't use force or talk about force when you're on the phone with a police officer. That's not going to work. So I was able to find some other statistics saying that 40 million people in this country have interactions with law enforcement each year. All right. Okay, interactions. I like that. I like where that's headed. Then I look a little closer. Guess what? It's a 2011 report using data from 2008. Couldn't find anything newer. So certainly, I mean, it gives you an idea, I guess. With population growth, we're probably north of 40 million people. Starts to give you some perspective, but not really what I was looking for. I want you to bear with me while I work through these examples of statistics because I'm taking this home somewhere. I'm driving home, all right? Then I found the Washington Post in 2015 started keeping stats about officer-involved shootings. In 2015 and 2016 were somewhat similar. In 2016, there were 465 suspects that were white shot by police. There were 233 suspects that were black shot by police. 160 were Hispanic, 42 were other, and 63 were unknown. And what you saw across 2015 to 2016, according to the Washington Post statistics, what it was that it was nearly 2-to-1 white people being shot by police to black. And I saw articles which used those statistics in that way. Whites are shot almost 2-1 to African Americans. So then I saw some other statistics using the same numbers from the Washington Post. I saw things like blacks were 2.5 more times as likely to be shot than whites. And what happened there was they took the percentage of the population that was African American, the percentage of the population that was white or other minorities, and then said, well, according to the percentage of the population that exists, if you use those numbers, then it's not 2-1. African Americans are actually 2.5 times more likely to be shot by police if you look at it like that. The Washington Post goes on to let you search this data by all kinds of different methods, but not by the race of the officer. So you're not able to see what race the officer is. At least I couldn't find it. So depending on where you're coming from, you can use the Washington Post stats to make your point. Right? No matter what your point is. And I found all sorts of people that have used it. I found studies from the Center for Policing Equity in New York found in a 2016 study that there is a racially desperate use of force despite the disparities in crime rates among the different races. That's what their study found. Found an article from Hillsdale College that contradicts that, saying that crime rates in African American communities plus the geographic disparities do explain the numbers. I kept looking. In 2016, Washington State University had a study called the reverse racism effect, and it found officers were slower to shoot armed black suspects than they were to shoot armed white suspects. And that same study also found that officers were less likely to shoot unarmed black suspects than they were unarmed white suspects. And last but not least, I found a new study from the Pew Research Center that was featured in the New York Times with a headline that read, quote, white and black officers are sharply divided about race. We are. That wasn't my experience in my 15-year career. I mean, certainly I heard of instances of it, and working in internal affairs for a time, I did have a case or two that came through there that where people complained about racial or gender issues. But for the vast majority of my career, I would have described a pretty harmonious existence among the police officers, honestly. I would say we felt like we were family, and we worked together, and we didn't all like each other, but I didn't think there was a lot of racial tension in the ranks. That's just my experience after 15 years in a department with 1,500 people, which is a significant size department, almost 1,500. It's like 1,450 to 1,486, somewhere in there. That wasn't my experience. So I start reading this article a little more closely, and I'm thinking, well, what police departments are this happening in? Well, it turns out this Pew Research study, as the New York Times talked about it in their article, goes on to say nearly 8,000 officers were surveyed. 8,000 officers? There's 900,000 police officers, law enforcement officers in America, approximately. Nobody even really knows that number. But it's somewhere around there. And even if we agree, that's 1% or less. At 900,000, that's less than 1% of officers. So I think the headline is definitely not as catchy when it reads, less than 1% of police officers are sharply divided about race, which the headline could have also read. Right? It could have. That could be the headline, but it wasn't. The study did find something interesting, however. This would match the experience that I had as a police officer. They found that the results were close to unanimous, where the wording was the words used in the New York Times article, that officers were close to unanimous in their belief that the public does not comprehend and understand the dangers of police work. The article goes on to say that a majority of Americans believe they understand the risks associated with law enforcement. They offered no support for that, but I would agree that a majority of Americans think that, and I would also agree that a majority of Americans are wrong about that. All right, so is everyone thoroughly exhausted? I am. I'm exhausted and I'm confused. I am. So let me make some arguments now and draw some conclusions other than the ones I drew in the beginning of this, where that statistics can be a nightmare and manipulated, based on what I've just told you. And I'm going to start where I left off. We as Americans think we know what it's like for police officers. And I think we also believe we know what it's like for a bunch of other people. I mean, I think about, and this happens, this is just everybody. This is everybody. I do this too. I think about airline pilots. I go, yeah, okay. You wear a suit, you get in, you do a checklist, right? You talk on the radio. Good day, flight 464, clear runway 29er. Got it. Pull some throttles, move some levers, flick some switches. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. The Grand Canyon is, right? I mean, you talk to the people, you land the plane, you go to a hotel, you do it again, right? I mean, we feel like we have a good grasp of what that would be like, right? A dentist. I know what a dentist does. The hygienist cleans my teeth. He comes in and goes, open, close, open, close, open, close. Oh, it looks good. The mirror around there. I'm like, what? That's not what it's like for a dentist. I mean, they do lots of other stuff, but I haven't had a lot of dental work done. But from my experience, dentists just come in and they look around your mouth. And you're good and you're out. That's it. Pharmacists, yeah, they stand up on the podium. They wear a white coat. They put the sticky labels on the pills. They count your pills. They put it in the computer. We know what that's like. You get my point here. I don't think we do. I don't think we can know what it's like until we've actually done the job. The difference is because of a lack of understanding, and this is where I come in, everything that I've been doing since I left the police force, whether it's my book From Boy to Blue, whether it's the podcast, whether it's the articles, was to address this particular point. Because although I don't believe anybody can really understand what a job is like until they do it, I do certainly believe that I'm able to enlarge significantly the average person's understanding of the job of police officer, which will help with the relationship between police and citizens across the country and therefore makes everybody safer. It doesn't mean police shootings are going to be over, but I think the average contact between police and citizens will be safer when there's a better understanding. And I do think America's mistaken about the dangers and challenges of police work. And I think that they believe they understand it, but I'm not sure they do. The next point I want to make is that police officers around this country are made up of all kinds of different races. There's black officers, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander, and every other race you can think of. There's Jewish officers, Christian officers, Islamic, atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, and so on and so forth across the different religions. Some police officers have a GED. Some of them have high school diploma. Some of them have an associate's degree. Some of them have a bachelor's degree. Some of them have a master's degree. Some of them have doctorates. I know officers from all different education levels. There's officers that come from all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds. There's officers all across America that were born in different countries, that were born in big cities like New York or small towns like Hayes, Kansas. There's gay officers, straight officers, bisexual, transgender. There's all kinds of police officers. What I'm trying to say, we are trying to label a diverse group of people based solely on their profession as one thing or the other. Cops are racist. Cops like to beat a certain race over the other. We as human beings, our brains, I think, just work like this. We like simple things. We like simple explanations. Our brains are wired to deduce conclusions. And we want to do that. But this isn't the earth is round kind of stuff. This is quantum physics kind of stuff. It's a lot. There's a lot of factors here. You can't boil this stuff down to one sentence conclusions, which is what everybody's trying to do. And so how do you address this then? Well, every case is unique and complex. And I say this in my book. Every case is different. There are so many factors that go into every single case. I'll just give you a few of them. What was the information known at the time the police officers were responding? What was known to or told to the officers by dispatchers, call takers? What was the history of the address of the call? What was the history of the officer? What's the officer's history? That's important. What's the suspect's history? That's important. What did everybody see? What did everybody do? What did the different people involved in this perceive? And why did they perceive it? And was their perceptions rational? What did the witnesses say? Where were the witnesses? How far were they? What did the physical evidence tell you? And on and on and on it goes. This is why we have to look at each case individually. We can't rely on Beyoncé's one-line description of what happened in a police shooting as a recap of the incident. There's so much more to it all than that. We can't listen to and rely on the news to recap this in a 1-minute package. Can't be done. If only there were entities looking at these police shootings based on all of these factors. Oh, wait, there is. That's what happens in America. This is done in every police shooting across America. It's just usually not completed for months and months at a time after the incident. And almost always, these reviews are available for public consumption. But by that time, it's too late. People have made up their minds. And we're off to the next high-profile incident, which everybody's making their mind up about again. But 4 to 6 months later, they've forgotten about it. They just know they made up their minds the first few minutes based on a one-liner, a quick story, a few facts. So I'll give you an example of how this works, and I'm going to use Denver. And I'm going to read a quote here from the district attorney's office. The protocol that is used in Denver to investigate and review officer-involved shootings was reviewed and strengthened by the Erickson Commission in 1997 under the leadership of William Erickson, former Chief Justice of the Colorado Supreme Court. The report released found it to be one of the best systems in the country for handling officer-involved shootings, and I was fortunate enough to work at this police department. You can find this at denverda.org. The Denver District Attorney, who is elected, might I add, releases shoot letters most always. As an example, this was an incident that occurred from April 12th, and the letter came out from the district attorney's website on August 11th. May, June, July, August. 4 months, and that's quick. The report's very detailed. You'll find in there a summary of the facts. You'll find a summary of the facts from each person's perspective. You'll find even quotes from the people involved in this incident. There's a video evidence section. There's a physical evidence section. There's an autopsy report, a toxicology report. There's a legal analysis and conclusions. There's photos of the crime scene. And the one I saw, there was even a couple autopsy photos. This stuff is just available for consumption on the website by anybody because it's a transparent system to see what your elected officials did with the information, what information they collected, and what decision they made. And in the instances where they go to trial, like in the Philando Castillo shooting, the fate of that officer was decided by a jury made up of white and black jurors. So if you want to know more, my point to you is you have to wait for these processes that are already in place to complete. And then you have to take the time to go read the decision letters because the news isn't going to go over. This report was detailed. It's several pages. You're not going to be able to cover this in a news story. Beyonce's not going to be able to give us all the facts in her one-line video. I would encourage people to read my book, From Boy to Blue, because it gives you a really good perspective about what it's like to be out there day in and day out for years at a time. I would also encourage you that there are elected officials, grand juries, and lots of other review and oversight boards monitoring the use of force by police officers, and that this can't be boiled down to one-line conclusions about a group of people that are as diverse as this country is. And my final plea to everybody would be to please stop with the first question out of everyone's mouth after a police shooting being, what was the race of everybody involved? We have to stop asking about race first. It almost seems like, oh, the police shot somebody? I just can picture this in the newsrooms, right? Or, the police shot somebody? Oh, he was white? Oh, okay. Well, what's Trump doing today? I'm not saying we shouldn't be concerned about race. What I'm saying is let's stop it from being the first question off our tongues. That's what I'm asking. All right, I want to thank everybody for their time. I want to thank you for being here. We'll be over at stevewarneke.com. And we'll see you next time on the Steve Warneke Show. Thanks for being with us.
That's why I'm keeping the faith.